Good evening to those of you joining us in the UK. Good morning if you're in the, depends what part of the USA you're in, and this late evening in the Far East, in Australia, in the South East Asia. Today we've got a really special guest, Danna Pycher. She's going to talk about her own experiences, an inspirational story. Her background is in hypnotherapy, hypnosis. She also is an international speaker, travels the world, excellent speaker. If you get a chance, you should check out her TEDx talk. Was phenomenal, really intriguing, and she managed to sort of encapsulate hypnosis and her experiences all within a very short duration. The talk is fantastic. So, Danna, thanks for joining us on the show. It's great to have you on board.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So, yeah, you're an author. You've sort of specialized now in hypnotherapy, and maybe it might be an idea to start off with your journey into the field of hypnosis. If you could sort of tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, definitely. Okay, so I got into this because before I was a hypnotist, it was never anything I even considered. Oftentimes people that get into this line of work, it really is like a second career. It's not something that some people, I've met like one or two people that they were born thinking, oh, I want to get into this work. Rare. So before I was aware of this work, I wasn't really even aware of this world at all. I was not introduced to this, the world of hypnosis. It wasn't even a resource that I was interested in until it became something that I needed by necessity, and is the resource that I credit to saving my mental health after a near fatal car accident. So the story is about 8 years ago. I was nearly killed in a car accident. I was left on the side of the road, basically hanging upside down until the firefighters came to cut me out with the jaws of life. I was hanging upside down for about 35 minutes. And as a result, I had really significant physical injury, but even worse so was my emotional state. And I developed trauma, really, really severe trauma, meaning I could not leave my house without thinking lightning was going to strike and I would die in that moment.
Yes.
Yeah, very significant, very extreme. And I knew I needed help because before my accident, I was very independent, very confident. And within 30 seconds of this accident, my whole personality shifted. I became a broken shell of a person. And I knew I kind of had a end goal. I really wanted to get back to who I was. I didn't know if it was possible. And really, most people told me it was not possible. Most doctors and specialists and anyone that I went to in authority back then they basically said, this is your new normal, except the fact that you're a traumatized girl. So I wasn't so interested in that opinion. Thank God. I was not so keen to thinking that that's the truth. So I went and I sought out therapy because I knew something significant happened to me. So I wanted to, seek help. And the therapy was great for all intents and purposes. That being said, it did nothing to clear my trauma. So talking and talking and talking, I knew the ins and outs of what happened to me in the accident. It did not do anything to clear the fact that I was still exhibiting trauma, PTSD symptoms. I was very lucky to come across a woman who survived cancer, and she said she would not be alive today were it not for this trauma therapist she went to. And so I signed up. I went to this woman, and within the first session, she said she's a bit different. And I said, whatever, please, whatever you have. And she said, I do this thing called hypnosis. And at that time, I was very traumatized again and highly skeptical. And I said, you can do anything and everything you wish, except for that. That is something you're not going to touch me with a 10-foot pole. No, thank you. I'm not interested in, brainwashing or anything like that. I said no. And with a number of sessions of liking her and getting to know her and connecting with her, she brought it up again. And then I said, let's do it. And then within the first session, I left feeling lighter. And then within about a month and a half, all my trauma was cleared. The next month, my depression, and the next month, my anxiety. So that's the beginning of the story. That's where I first found this work, was by necessity.
Yeah, it's a really powerful story that you mentioned there. It's really kind enough to share your journey. I think most people who end up practicing hypnotherapy, hypnosis, or various therapies have got a story to tell of their own. Like you said, it's very rare, at least in my experience anyway, that people go along and think this is going to be my career choice. Now, it's interesting you say, I have this analogy that I use. So the analogy I use is say, I mean, trauma can manifest itself in various ways, and people associate trauma to someone fighting in a war, and that's not undermining people who fight in wars, obviously. That's traumatic in itself, but trauma can be as a result of, like you mentioned, a car accident. It can also be domestic violence. It could be a number of things. But also the analogy I use too, Dan, is like if you take a piece of paper, if you just rip one piece at a time, you don't notice it, but bit by bit, eventually, you end up in a mess. And I think for me, in modern society, with all the stresses and strains, and I mean, don't get me wrong, life is, a great experience, and the world is a wonderful place to be. It's also, we've created this environment for ourselves, this modern way of living that can be very stressful. So you get up in the morning, you've got deadlines, you've got places to be, bills to pay, all these things. And I think bit by bit, it creates stress in people. And we know that stress in high volumes, there's plenty of research out there, people can research themselves, stress in high volumes is not good. Not good at all. High levels of cortisol in the body, it's not good. It's quite interesting because I think sometimes that we probably can handle certain big events. I think it's the small events that around that as well that make life difficult, as well as it's not just obviously a big event that you went through. It's huge. It's going to have a big impact on someone, certainly the limbic system, that's for sure. And I suppose in one sense you mentioned that, it's fascinating you say that, because I think that you can do, and I'm a fan of talking therapies. I think they're useful, they've got their place. But the point being, you're not reaching that limbic part of the brain. That part of the brain that, okay, well, I know I shouldn't be scared no more. I'm not in danger now. But then the aversion of the amygdala, the limbic system. And that's where sort of your work fascinates me, the work you do in the stress response and the immune system, because I think you're going to sort of share a bit with the audience what you do in that area, the stress response and the immune system.
Yes, exactly. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything you say. And I'm an advocate for different types of therapy. And my biggest thing when people go and seek out help is that just like there's a spectrum of different doctors to go to, a spectrum of different therapists, there's a spectrum of people in which you can go to. Some people are more better calibrated and better suited for you. So someone that's perfect for me might not be great for you, and vice versa. And then on top of that, I always say that if you can find someone that is doing therapy that has other alternative tools underneath their belt, just to have the techniques at their disposal, that's powerful. So that's that. And if you can find an amazing hypnotist, of course. And so the work I do specifically with people, I specialize in physical ailments, autoimmune disease, neuroimmune issues. And there's the second part of that story, which you spoke about a bit earlier, was before my accident, I had chronic fatigue as a young girl, and no doctor was able to really tell me. And this was before chronic fatigue was even given any credit. It was just this, fake mystery illness that people that are stressed out maybe have. So I was young and this happened, and I got no answers. So I did my own healing. And the first way I found healing was through nutrition. And by recognizing that when I ate a certain way, when my body was able to detox a certain amount and to be able to be more clean in that way, then my fatigue symptoms were lessened, and I got it to a point where they were just gone. And then after the accident, which is, again, like what you said, when I had an extreme shock to my nervous system, extreme shock to my limbic system, I didn't put it together at first. It actually took me a bit to put the two together. But that trauma, that big shock stayed in my nervous system, stayed within my body. And anytime there's any sort of emotional stressor, which is where the hypnotic work comes in, it immediately went to that large trigger and created that cascade effect of fight or flight, save yourself, protect yourself, nervous system contraction, and any type of physical distress that your body would have to go through in order to save your life. But if your body is constantly getting the message, save your life, save your life, save your life, do all these things to contract, then unfortunately, you're in a chronic inflammatory, state that's going to create this havoc in which we have today. So it's true that we have stressful lives. Unfortunately, we can't get away from that. And what I like to say is that you can't control life, what happens in life. But what you can control is kind of that middle piece of your response to life. So instead of a stressful emotional situation happening and immediately it going into your subconscious mind and creating fatigue and drain and pain and this immediate response, a lot of what I do is I disconnect that response, that immediate reaction. I disconnect that from your emotional world and your subconscious world. So therefore, you go through life with these normal stressors, but it doesn't exactly go there and trigger that. Therefore, there's space. There's space between what's happening in life and a flare-up, like something that's going to trigger you, your stress response, emotional response, that's going to create that flare-up. So I disconnect that within your subconscious mind. Therefore, your nervous system and your mind can just relax and not be in that fight or flight response consistently.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting that you say. I think it's fascinating work because the body generally knows what to do if it's given the chance, the homeostasis.
Yeah.
I think in recent years, the learning about the immune system and the research done around the cytokines and the blood-brain barrier, and there's so much that's being done now, and the realization that the mind and body is one system as well. And people who struggle to understand that, you've only got to sort of suggest, okay, under stress, you can break out in a rash. For example, the herpes virus that people contract young in life, the one that they contract young, can live dormantly in the spine and then, manifest itself in a cold sore under stress. So all these things, and, sometimes you feel stressed and at a certain time of year, maybe Christmas time, and people have more prone to the flu or cold. So the mind and body is sort of one system, really. And I think that it's quite interesting, the work that you do, because it's tough because there's no real, at least as far as I'm aware, I'm not a medical person, I deal with the mind, but there's no, from what I can see, any sort of biomarkers to sort of go in there and say, okay, if someone's got burnout or if someone's got a mental health condition, then they're relying on a diagnostic manual, which is useful. It gives you something to work with and gives you an idea how the future's going to go to a point. But then the problem you've got then is like, I guess you've got people like yourself and myself who aren't going to accept a diagnosis or prognosis in the sense that, okay, that's it for you.
Right.
And having been down that road myself, and the similar experience to yourself was like, well, actually, you know what, I'm going to do some research on my own, and you go on your own path, and not everyone's got the time and awareness to do that. And you sort of figure things out. What works for you nutritionally. I did a nutritional test and eliminated certain foods. Uptake of greens, broccoli, blueberries, but that might work for everybody because people might be allergic to that. Well, I'm not sure, but you've got to find what works for you. But that can be a really lengthy process. And I think that people have experienced situations like yourself. I wouldn't say, a mentor in that respect, but at least you sort of know through your own trials and tribulations, and you've got an idea. And how much do you think that your experience that you went through, because I can imagine it would have been traumatic in itself, that fatigue syndrome, obviously very young, with the whole future ahead of you, thinking, oh no, what now? And obviously in the dark, and the pains, myalgia pains. And I think in my experience, I'm for the medical profession. There's some great people in that field, all that said and done. But generally speaking, there's a lot of things that I don't know a great deal about, and people get sort of in a situation that, like for example, the Lyme disease is the big one these days that sort of is come to fruition, and people have been ill for years and they've not known. But there's no real biomarker. There's no way of going into the medical at this point anyway, unless someone can email me otherwise. It's okay. Well, this is what is going on, and this is what we can do. So, how much do you think that what you went through defined you in your profession?
Definitely. I am my first guinea pig. So everything that is a resource that I call upon, or any type of healing technique that I have developed or come across, is because I'm its first guinea pig. I don't really do anything or advocate for anything until I see it work like 10 times. I first start with the intellect. Things need to process with me in order for me to really become a big advocate, because I come from a world that was purely skeptical of the healing arts, laughable actually. I kind of used to make fun of people that were in that world, and now I'm wholeheartedly of that world. But I think what's an interesting blend is now, even though I'm a full-on advocate of the healing arts, but I still have the complete understanding rationally why this works, scientifically why this works. So yeah, I am my first guinea pig with everything, for better or for worse. I would never recommend getting ill. Obviously, it's no one's fault, or having to go through that life experience. But everything that I have developed and thought of and advocate for is because I was the first to try it and have success with it, or not have success with it, and rule it out, and stuff like that. And unfortunately, nowadays, I work with kids that have gastritis. I work with teenagers that have, really bizarre mystery illnesses. And there's a lot of aspects as to why, but it's rampant. And there has to be more of a widespread awareness of how, as individuals, we can go in and process these emotions, that we can and feel better ourselves. So I do find that there needs to be way more education into how to live with this bombarding life that we have.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the thing, and that's the sort of key. But the thing is, it's not going to. I don't think it's going to change in a hurry. So there's not a great deal in the sense that the world is the way it is, and it doesn't look like it's going to change in too much of a hurry. So I guess in one sense, it's sort of, one must take some responsibility. Not that I'm sort of suggesting someone who falls ill, it's their fault. I'm just saying that what you do is key, and it can be frustrating. And I suppose for me, I think, going into the future, epigenetic and understanding more about the genes is going to hold a lot of keys. But at the moment, the sort of excitement around the genome project and the things that were suggested that we could do haven't really manifested, because the body is quite complex and there's so many genes that we do have. So it's not as simple as identifying a series of genes. But we are, I think, coming a long way. But I think for me, until we get until we sort of improve and understand more in that respect, it's about understanding what we have and what we can do. And like yourself, for me, I've always sort of, I wouldn't say I've been dismissive. I've always, I would never dismiss anything. I think that, we've got to have an open mind, but I always question things. I always sort of question very heavily and everything. You can't explain certain things, and there's certain things that just science can explain so much, but there's many things it can't explain. And the key thing is, if you ran a trial, or it takes forever really, and the funding and everything that goes with it. People sort of want to do or improve as quick as they can, as swiftly as they can. But what's quite interesting in terms of what you do, if you give us you sort of give us an idea, but if you give people listening or watching an idea, what are some of the people who come to see you, Danna? What's an example of someone who will sort of come along to see you?
So I see pretty much every human issue. When I first started, before I got into more and had like the epiphany of, which is a whole other story, of really honing in on the mind, body, and the physical illness stuff. When I first started, I started like every other hypnotist with the lifestyle stuff, like the addictions and the smoking and the weight loss and stuff like that. So that's kind of like what a lot of hypnotists are known for and do, and addictions and food stuff. And then it really translated into what I specialize in now, which is the trauma connection, the repressed subconscious emotion that is creating physical distress, all the way to the more like esoteric. And I do also work around relationship patterns and even work with entrepreneurs to kind of get through mental blocks. So it's the spectrum of things. When it comes to illness stuff, what I've seen is everything. I mean, I've seen like the standard of what I see mostly is chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, like an autoimmune, neuroimmune. I see multiple sclerosis. I've seen very rare conditions that doctors can't get a read on. Most people come to see me after they've been to doctors for years and years and years. I'm sure you know. I'm generally the last resort. And I get it, because again, this hypnosis as a practical resource for working with this stuff is not very well known. And that's a big advocacy that I'm passionate about, is that not only should this be in the forefront of people's mind, it shouldn't even be thought of as an alternative. It should be thought of as number one, like, how do I work with my inner world to come and feel better in my outer world? Not only as practitioners, that there should be more practitioners making that leap from working with the lifestyle stuff into the more kind of deeper work of the mind, body, physical, not only that, but even every single individual as a human being on earth having a handful of techniques themselves to learn how to process their energy and their emotional load and stuff like that. And I think, honestly, we're evolving into that, because I think that people are really sick and tired of feeling that their only option when they're ill is some sort of medication or injection. Because again, even if you take a pill, it's not sustainable. It's not, permanent. And even if you get injections, what happens in the next couple months when it wears off? What are you going to do?
Exactly. No, I think so. And for me, I mean, I'm not a medical expert, so, in that respect, but what I would say is that, if you read the side effects of some of these things too, and hypnosis for me is non-intrusive in the sense that, okay, you either sit through it. If it's not for you, then don't do it. But I your point about people sort of coming along to see you from a last chance point of view. I mean, to be honest, what I do too, then if people come to see me, I always recommend they go see a GP if they haven't done so first, only because obviously if there could be something that they could treat, it could be a condition. And then even if they do go see a GP, another condition, then I could work adjacent if it's if it's sort of suitable. But I think it all goes towards all of us working together in a holistic way, and not being reductionist and saying, okay, it's one size fits all or one thing for every person, because they can benefit on various levels, whatever the level is. And that's the sort of thing that I think can be quite useful, in the sense that, okay, if we can all work together closer with nutritionists, with medical people, and it's all better for the patient, for the client, because they're going to get the best possible service. So, I mean, there might be people that prefer doing one thing more than something else, and that's entirely up to them.
I think you're right. I think it has to be holistic. Because we're dealing with a whole human. And I definitely do advocate for people to get the tests done by the doctors, get, very clear about what is happening to them, and have, someone that is supporting them medically, for sure. I mean, that's definitely the basic foundation. And I do believe that there needs to be a holistic team. Unfortunately, when someone gets sick, it requires a team of, what do I eat? Because also, like we mentioned, what's good for me might not be good for you, which the unfortunate part when you start to have these chronic issues and symptoms is you have to become a scientist. You have to become your own advocate. You have to become your own doctor. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And it's really, really can even just that be stressful. And I think on top of that, not only doing all your own education, is I know also from firsthand experience and people that I work with, that when you have other people in your family that don't really understand, I remember when I first started going through these symptoms, I don't think anyone in my family really believed me. When I first started changing my diet so I can feel better, no one supported me. It's all
Mm.
about being your own advocate and fighting your own battles, which can get very exhausting, which is another element of, unfortunately, you know, when you are the one that doesn't feel good and you have to advocate for yourself. So having a good support system is really important. I think nowadays more people believe us mystery illness people.
Yes.
And there are resources out there that will sustainably shift the mind-body connection. And more and more, they're becoming more mainstream, which is a good thing.
I think so too. I think it's important for people like yourself. I mean, the TED Talk was fantastic, and for those of you who haven't watched it, I do suggest to watch the TED Talk. It was an amazing talk. I think that during the talk, Dana, you sort of came across so well, and I think that, you know, a lot of people try and explain hypnosis and their experience, and I think that it's not an easy phenomena to sort of explain in one sense. And you've got people who are and try and explain it very academically. You've got people who, the ego, it's like some sort of magical, mystical thing. They're the only ones who know. But the point being, for me, it's just a gentle process, and it's a non-intrusive process you can use, and it's really, really powerful stuff. But there still is a stigma around it. And,
Yeah.
I mean, what you mentioned there sort of reminds me of I worked with this case I'll sort of mention very briefly. A few years ago, there was a young girl I was working with who sort of had fibromyalgia and severe anxiety. And she was working with a consultant at the time, and she was seeing a talking therapist at the time as well. And she asked if she could work with me for anxiety issues. And I said, well, I'm going to speak to a clinician first and see if they're okay with me working with you. And they were fine. They said, okay, it's not a problem if she wants to work with you. But the only issue is that in the UK, you've got a health service through the government. And if you're in that health service, then if you come out of it, at least in her situation, they might not have let her back in. And I had to tell her that. Well, I mean, not let her back in, but the treatment that she was seeing through the clinician, she might not have been able to carry on seeing her because it could be a conflict of interest. So I said, I'm happy to work with you. I've got an open mind. But in the end, she decided to work with me because she felt that for 4 or 5 years, she was getting nowhere. She wouldn't even leave the house for years. And in a very short space of time, she got her life back. And we keep in touch now, and she's on my social media, and she's doing really well now. She's got businesses, and she comes along to my seminars here and there. But I only use that story because it was the consultant got the secretary to write me a letter to say, what did I do? Because they were intrigued. And I offered to go down there, and say, you know, I'll do a talk. I don't want anything of it. I'm going to keep it low key because I don't want to sort of like, you know, to make any ridiculous claims. I said, I didn't do anything that anybody else couldn't have done. I just used some practical techniques to help her for the anxiety. But in my own mind, I felt that by calming the limbic system down, the aversion that she had, and you know, long story short, you know what it's all about. I'm sure the listeners can do their own research. But the point being is that, you know, it goes to show, and I felt that your TED Talk, what it did really, really well, it was in a user-friendly way. It wasn't any sort of ridiculous claims. It wasn't any sort of like, you know, it was purely from the heart. You'd been through this experience. You learned these skills, and they're very useful skills. And I guess the question is in this day and age, why do you think there's still a stigma around hypnosis that people have?
That's a great question. You know, it's interesting. I asked a teacher of mine, one of my mentors, that same question. I said, listen, if this tool that we all know is so powerful, is so perfect for so many things, and again, disclaimer, you know, it's there's many resources to use for a lot of things, but but in general, if we know it to be so powerful for really getting into the mind and clearing out and cleaning up, why are people still scared about it, and why is there still a stigma? And it's something that interesting that you said that really popped into mind is, you know, people are very willing to do these medical experiments. They're willing to take a medication with side effects that they don't know what's going to happen with them. And that is in our education. We are educated to just forget about the fact that we're taking something that we don't know what's in it. We're just trusting the fact that we're just going to take it, and who knows? So we're not scared to do that, but we're scared to do this thing called hypnosis. First of all, people just don't know what it is. That's it. There's no education around it. So if you don't know what it is, of course, you're going to be scared about it because you just don't know what it is, and that you don't know what you don't know. and that's okay.
Yes.
So that's number one, why people are scared about it, because just the name has the name and the stigma, period. But like you said, it's non-invasive. It's through the use of imagination. You know, we go in and we're just broadening your thought process and just really calming down your limbic system, and amongst, you know, many other things that we do within hypnosis.
Yes.
So people don't know about it. There's no education, and a big advocacy of mine is to really get it out there and allow it to be more mainstream, and that people just know of it as a resource practically. The second thing is when I was talking to this teacher, and it was the fact that hypnotists themselves, hundreds of thousands of therapists graduate every year from universities across the world, and sheer volume of numbers. So the amount of hypnotists there are, like you said, most hypnotists come to it because they have been affected by it themselves. So there's not as many of us. That's it. You know, and for all the hypnotists that, you know, become hypnotists, not everyone's doing it full time. And it's something that the issue is the amount of numbers that exist without that volume of attention. It's literally just that. And I found that very interesting because that makes sense. There's not a lot
exactly. I think so. I sort of echo those sentiments too. I think also the stage as well, the sort of, you know, the stage hypnotist as well, which have their place.
Yeah.
They're sort of fun to watch, and people do enjoy watching them. It's not really my thing. I wouldn't sort of go my way to go watch a stage person, but I fully appreciate what they do, and you know, it's entertainment. But I think that also creates a stigma too. And I think too as well, the other thing I would say too is some of the real conventional methods as well. And I think that the sort of person that's attracted to the industry for many years, I think the more people like you who get into the industry, when I say people like you, I mean, you know, you've got like a sort of gentle approach, in the sense that I'm sure you can be very direct, but the point being is that, okay, the way you explain it, I think over the years you've had people who sort of like, you know, sort of portray it as like a magical, mystical type thing, really, and it's sort of attracted a type of person in that respect who can be, you know, there's a lot of things, it's multifactorial, but I think as a process is quite powerful, like you said. For me, I run adjacent to other stuff that I do. It's not the only thing I do, but it's my preferred modality, in the sense that I think that it's one way of sort of reaching parts of the brain that you couldn't normally reach unless you have experiences. And I think experiences are what changes. You know, an episode in the car, a walk down the street, it's these experiences that sort of change us. And I think it's an idea, an association of behavior. And you think that, you know, like, you take a young person, for example, who sees their uncle smoking, and they think that's cool, idea, association, cool, then you got a behavior, they smoke. Then it doesn't matter what the parents say or anyone else says, don't smoke. They're not going to listen to that, more than likely. But if they experience the situation where they're out of breath or they see an emphysema ward, it might shock them into a new idea, new association. So the key thing is, I think for me, you sort of create that experience for people. It can be really, really powerful as well. And so you do regression as well. Then that's quite fascinating, I think, for people watching regression. That's powerful stuff. Is that?
Yeah, regression is my favorite. So there's so many tools to use within hypnosis, and I happen to just love this tool specifically. I mean, I like all of it, but regression is something I always just find myself gravitating towards, because I like to be completely unbiased. I love the fact that this work is, I just kind of guide someone there. So regression is going into the memories that hold the emotional charge for whatever the topic is. So if it's an addiction or if it's a physical ailment, it's kind of like where the origin, the seed of that experience began. And just from that point on, time and time again, the subconscious mind just kind of attracted, you know, that specific imagery, feeling, memory into this specific folder that is entitled, you know, anxiety or emotion. So if we had to think every single time a situation happened, we'd be on overload and we wouldn't be able to function. So the subconscious mind just stores this information just for easy access and, you know, knowing how to function just like it's instantaneously.
Yeah.
So regression goes into that file folder, goes into the origin, and is able to kind of clear that out. So I just love it. I do it in a mix with other stuff, but that happens to be my favorite tool, just because, especially for physical ailments, it just really gets to the heart of the matter. And I use regression not only just to kind of like, I see it as like an emotional bucket load. So the first thing I do with people is I clear out their emotional world. So if it's stress and overwhelm, anxiety, depression, anger, whatever that is, I see it as a bucket and like layer by layer. And I don't see people like, as most hypnotists, I see people a handful of times, majority of times about 8 sessions, even if it's for like really physical distress. So I clear out that emotional load, draining out the emotions that are just stuck in your subconscious mind, clearing them out. It's basically like taking out the garbage, throwing it out. You no longer need these memories. It's happened in the past. It's not happening now.
No, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Clear it out. And then when it comes specifically to physical ailments, I'll go, let's say if they have arthritis in their wrist or gastritis, I'll go directly to that area of the body. I'll regress them specifically around that area of the body where they're holding potentially cellular memory of emotions in that area, and clear that out. And just the last thing about that is we all have stress. It's a human functioning to have stress. It's all of us. But how we exhibit our stress is different for each one of us. So for people that might have headaches, they have their stress and it gets exhibited in their head. So that being said, regression around the stress around their chronic migraines would just bring out the stress that just, gets triggered there. Therefore, we clean that up. And their stress signal doesn't have to immediately signal a headache. It can just kind of dissipate. And I do that wherever the ailment is in the body, therefore laser focusing specifically on where the stress is kind of tensing up and contracting that part of the body.
That's really interesting stuff. That's fascinating. And I mean, speaking of regression, the past life regression as well. And for me, the regressive process is a way of reappraising a certain situation. So, for example, if someone got pushed into a swimming pool at 5 years of age and they haven't gone swimming for, say, 50 years or so, this was someone I'd worked with actually on the radio, and it wasn't for swimming. Ironically, it was to help her reduce in weight. But I felt she could go swimming again. That would go a long way to helping her become social. And if she's enjoying her life, she's less likely to eat some of the foods that she was eating for one reason or the other. But she, since 5, 6 years of age, she had this sort of fear, and she tried everything you could try. But even in the 60s, she still wouldn't go, and with just regression, and went back, and you know how it works. But equally in saying that, sometimes people push back, and you go back to another life. And I mean, I do seminars and teach workshops in it, and people say to me, "Do you believe in other lives?" And genuinely, truthfully, honestly, Danna, I don't know. I really don't know if it's true. If there are, I have had people go to places that they could never have imagined, but then the scientist in me tells me that the mind is quite implicit. They might have seen a film as a 2-year-old and it stored the memory. They could have seen something or read it on a book. But the open-mindedness person in me tells me that who knows. But for me, the key is doing the process to help the person go from maladaptive to adaptive, to help them achieve the outcome. But what's your take on past life? I mean, I know there are some people who think that that's the case, it's possible. And what are your sort of thoughts on,
Yeah, it's so interesting. Past lives is a fascinating topic. And it's so funny. When people find out I'm a hypnotist, I would say like 5 times out of 10, they'll be like, "Oh, do you do past lives?" I'm like, how is this what people know about hypnosis? And obviously it's because Brian Weiss and his books.
That's right,
I'm like, past lives? Like, why don't we get to the practical stuff? Most of what I do is childhood, but every time I do past life, I always think to myself, why am I not doing this every single time with every single client? And it's fascinating. So I used to never believe in it. I was just like, it's a technique I learned. And what I liked about it is that it was extremely effective. I couldn't exactly tell you why. It just liberated something within the psyche that allowed the person to stop repeating a pattern. Whether it's true, whether it's not, I honestly didn't really know or even care so much.
No,
And
exactly, yeah.
right. And as I become more spiritual and I've been doing this work a bit more and have my different kind of thought process, I do believe in it. I
Wow.
do. I do
Yeah.
believe in past lives and reincarnation. But outside of that, I can say that is probably one of the most potent types of treatments you can go through. It's extremely healing. It's like 50 years of therapy in a sitting. And there are people I've worked with that until we did a past life, we did this angle in childhood, that angle, this technique. It wasn't until we did past life. And there's a couple examples I can give, but there wasn't until we did past life that the person really, really started kind of clicking in and feeling better.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And I mean, the way I see it is that, anything's possible. And I know, people like Brian Weiss, he sort of advocates that's sort of his belief. And at least from what I've read, or I've been on a couple of his workshops before, and he sort of is really, well, he's adamant, really. And he's, comes from a science background. I believe he was a doctor prior to going into doing what he does now. So it's quite fascinating, his story. I mean, I sort of think sometimes people in certain situations, did sort of experience the trauma. I think he lost one of his children very young. And sometimes, I don't want to be psychoanalytical. I'm putting my psychology hat on now. Maybe it was a way for him to sort of think, I don't know. I mean, if he's probably watching this, he'll probably email me saying that I'm wrong. But, who knows, really? I just don't know. It's one of them, really. But I always say to people, you know what? It's about achieving the outcome you want, and that's the most important thing. But equally, I don't think anyone can dismiss anything. We don't know enough, really, at this moment in time to sort of rule anything out. I think if people get benefit from that, that's the most important thing, and that's the sort of key going forward. But what I find quite interesting, sort of moving away from hypnosis, or not too far away from hypnosis, I may have mentioned that I joined a speaking group a few years ago, and like you go there and you refine your skills. Now, one of the biggest anxieties they say is public speaking is a huge anxiety. I think it's up there with all sorts, really. But yourself, I mean, you stood up and you did a TED talk that's been beamed through to the world now. It's going to live forever. You've got millions of viewers that will watch it. What advice, if anything, say to like a speaker who feels anxious? What advice could you? I wouldn't say advice, but any pointers you can give potential speakers who are afraid of getting up and speaking?
Definitely. The first biggest thing is when you're speaking, I like to say that it has nothing to do with you. Zero.
Wow.
It's you are the vessel and the channel for giving over a message. So if you kind of switch your thinking about that it doesn't matter if you mess up or you say the wrong thing. First of all, no one knows what's coming out of your mouth. They have zero idea of what you're going to convey. If your message is important, then it's about that. It's about the message, and it's not to do with you. It's to do with the fact that you were blessed and given with this message, and therefore, you give it over. Technically speaking, when it comes to giving a speech that is really connecting and compelling, especially within the world of hypnosis, that is a bit abstract and no one really understands unless they're, have experienced this or are hypnotists themselves, like advice for people that are kind of advocating for the healing arts and stuff like that. Is at first I like to say, definitely give over things you've seen in your clients and stories that you've seen that can really compel the emotional element and the human element of this work. And then you get into the technical, because like you said earlier, like most people that speak about this work, it's super technical and super brainiac and high level, when in reality, the person just wants to feel better. Can you convey the fact that this is a technique and give some stories to connect with, and then get into the technical.
Yeah, I mean, give them some education to sort of, if they want that, to know how it works. And I think the great good thing about the speech that you did on TED, I was really, it came through as being genuine. It sort of came from the heart. I think that's really important too, in regards to speaking about anything. I think it shows if someone sort of buys into what they're doing, and that's a big thing. I think that your belief in what you're doing, whatever it is that you do, is going to have a big impact on your client. So, irrespective of what modality you practice, whether it be CBT, NLP, hypnotherapy, EMDR, the belief you've got in what you do is going to have a big impact on the people you're working with, and that's the sort of key as well. But I think hypnosis is a challenge. Well, it would have been a challenge, I would imagine, to sort of spoke about that in your own experience in that short period that you have. And the reason being, you can sort of talk about, say, maths equation, science equation. It's sort of this sort of factual information that you sort of go through, 2 + 2, 5, 6, and the other. But hypnosis obviously is an abstract concept, and it's very broad and deep, really, in that respect. But so it was really, really good, and I sort of highly recommend anyone, not just from an educational point of view, who wants to learn about speaking, because a lot of people ask me in the speaking group how I speak, and it's quite ironic, really, because I'm quite an introverted character in the sense that I'm quite happy doing my own thing and reading, researching. I'm not really the sort of person who sort of gets any major gratification going on a stage and all sing and dance. But the point being, if I have to do what needs must, and I can sort of get out there and take the step, the leap of faith in doing that, I'm certainly not going to shy away. And I think what you do really, really well, I think, if there's any speakers out there, and I've recommended your talk to my speakers, because they talk about different speakers on TED. I said, well, you want to watch that talk because it comes through as being genuine and honest, and that's the most important thing you're going to make it as a speaker. Not so much, the technical side, which is important because they're so focused down on where they put their hands and what they do and what they do this, and that's important to a point. But if you don't get that core, then it doesn't matter what you do, people are going to see through it eventually anyway. But that's a really interesting thing. But I'm sort of mindful of time. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
If anyone wants to get in touch with you, if you've got contact details, they can get in touch with you.
Yes. And thank you so much. This has been amazing. So my website is dannapycher.com. So that's DANNAPYCHER.com. That's dannapycher.com. You can follow me on social media. I have an Instagram, which is Mind Coaching. Facebook is my name again, Danna Pycher, DANNAPYCHER. I also have online self-healing courses that are 30-day transformations for autoimmune relief, which deals with pain and fatigue, weight loss, and also emotional mastery, which helps with depression, anger, anxiety, etc. And feel free to go to my website, reach out, email me. We'll be in touch. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that's been great. Well, really thank you for coming on board the show, and I'm sure that everyone's enjoyed the show and got a lot out of it, and it'll long live in YouTube anyway. So who's meant to watch will watch it, and that's the sort of main thing. But thanks again, Danna. Have a great day, and speak soon. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye
you.
until next time.